The ocean was once a mouth that spoke in riddles, a cathedral of moving silence, older than memory, deeper than thought. In the long twilight before gods had names, before men carved prayers into stone, the sea was the first divine. It whispered its truths in waves and summoned monsters from the foam, great beings of salt and shadow that knew no borders, only hunger, vastness, and rhythm. Among them, one name survived the drowning of myth: Leviathan. Not a name at first, not even a creature, but a force, a curve of the abyss, the writhing shape of fear itself. In the oldest Mesopotamian minds, it slithered just below consciousness, a symbol made flesh, or a flesh-made symbol, appearing in dreams and floods, in stories told beside oil lamps where gods still bled into the earth. Later, it was given form. The coiling serpent, the sea dragon with eyes like shattered obsidian, its breath a furnace of boiling wind. And always, always it was chaos, not the absence of order, but its eternal rival, the primeval sea that refused to be tamed. Long before the Leviathan entered sacred scripture, it was already old. In the hymns of Ugarit, the Canaanites spoke of a seven-headed dragon, Lotan, whom Baal the storm god had to conquer to bring order to the world. In those lines we glimpse the earliest bones of the story, a god of thunder, a serpent of the sea, a battle that defines creation. But even Lotan was likely not the first. There are older shadows. From the Sumerians came Tiamat, mother of monsters, ocean made sentient. She too was a serpent, a dragon, a chaos being, and she too had to be slain by the younger gods to establish the cosmic order. The pattern repeats. Always a sea, always a dragon, always a storm god, rising to strike it down. When the Hebrews came, they did not erase the sea beast. They renamed it Leviathan, and they changed its meaning. No longer merely a rival to the divine, Leviathan became God's pet enemy. A beast made by the Creator not as a threat, but as a spectacle. A monster to be dominated, caged, and finally destroyed at the end of days. In the Psalms, Leviathan is described as frolicking, even playful, created for divine sport. In Job, it is terrifying, armored in flame, untouchable by man. In Isaiah, it is the target of apocalypse. On that day, the Lord will punish Leviathan with his great and mighty sword. But there is a fracture in this version, a contradiction barely hidden in the text. For why would God create such a thing, only to destroy it? Why does the Leviathan seem at times divine and at others demonic? Why does its destruction feel like a necessary but tragic ritual? The truth, perhaps, is that Leviathan is older than theology allows, older than monotheism, older than Scripture, a fossil of the ancient mind left buried beneath newer beliefs. Leviathan is what remains of the gods who ruled the sea before Yahweh reigned alone. It is the last breath of a drowned pantheon, not just a monster, but a memory. The violent metaphor through which new gods conquered the old. Because to conquer a people, you must conquer their monsters. And Leviathan was the greatest of them all. The myths say it lived in the deep. But the deep was never just water. It was the unconscious, the unseen world of death and dream. Leviathan's body was made of salt and time, but its soul was fear, the primal, unnameable terror of the ocean itself, the terror of being swallowed, of becoming nothing, or worse, becoming something other. And that terror did not vanish with time. It only changed names. And in doing so, it learned to hide, not in the sea, but in the language of gods. Leviathan became a cipher. To some, it was Babylon, bloated with power and pride. To others, it was death, the mouth that swallows. To mystics, It was ego unchained, but always. It lingered at the edge of doctrine, too ancient to kill, too sacred to forget. The rabbis of later centuries did not dismiss the Leviathan as myth. Instead, they transformed it into paradox. In their stories, two Leviathans were created, male and female, but one was slain to prevent the birth of monsters. The remaining beast was sealed in the ocean's depths, destined to battle at the end of time. And from its flesh, the righteous would feast, a meal made from chaos. This strange ritual, the devouring of the devourer, appears again and again in apocalyptic traditions. In consuming Leviathan, humanity is said to overcome its deepest fear. But what if this banquet is not literal? What if it is a metaphor, a spiritual drama played out in symbols? To eat Leviathan is to internalize what once terrified you, to hold the monster in your hands, and finally call it yours. This is not unique to Judaism. Across cultures, the monster of the sea is both enemy and teacher. The Norse spoke of Jormungandr, the world serpent, who encircles the earth and must be slain at Ragnarok, but whose death signals rebirth. In Hindu myth, the churning of the ocean reveals both poison and nectar, and in Greek tales, even Poseidon, god of the sea, is both protector and punisher, bringing storms and salvation in equal measure. The ocean god is never simple. That's because the sea is never simple. It is the mirror of the unconscious, the place where all boundaries dissolve, gender, morality, identity. To cross it is to risk transformation. To dive into it is to die to the surface world. And so its gods, like Leviathan, are not moral creatures, but liminal ones, shapeshifters, gatekeepers. But the rise of monotheism brought a change. God could no longer share the stage with monsters. He had to absorb them. What was once a rival now became a servant. What was once a mystery became a warning. And Leviathan, that twisting serpent of storm and salt, became a theological footnote, a creature made by God, controlled by God, and destroyed by God. But stories don't die so easily. In the shadow of the Enlightenment, when myth was dismissed and nature dissected, Leviathan reappeared, not as a creature of faith, but of philosophy. Thomas Hobbes borrowed the name to describe the state, a vast, artificial man made of citizens, wielding absolute power. Here, Leviathan was not the sea, but the system, the monster we make to protect ourselves, a secular echo of the old myth. And yet, Hobbes's Leviathan shared the same core, fear. It was fear that led ancient people to bow before the sea god. It was fear that led modern thinkers to surrender freedom for order. Leviathan, in all its forms, is born from the same trembling, the knowledge that we are small and the abyss is vast. But there is another way to read the myth, not as a warning, but as an invitation. Because what if Leviathan is not the enemy of God, but the threshold of divinity? What if the sea monster is not what we must slay, but what we must embrace to enter the sacred? In ancient initiation rites, the hero often descends into the water, the underworld, the womb of the world, to face a beast, not to destroy it, but to survive it, to be changed by it, to return with new eyes. And perhaps that is Leviathan's true role, not to threaten us, but to test us. Because every ancient tale worth remembering contains a door, and Leviathan is that door. Behind its coiled form lies not death, but initiation. It is not the monster that ends the story, but the trial that begins it. The real terror is not being devoured, but what we might become if we survive. In myth, this trial always takes place at the edge of the known world, a place where the maps end and the water begins. There, the laws of land no longer apply. There, the hero meets the beast, not to prove strength, but to confront the self. The deepest myths never offer gold or glory, they offer truth. And truth is always guarded by a monster. Leviathan, then, is not just the sea. It is the part of us that lives below the surface, the instinct we fear, the desire we suppress, the chaos we refuse to name. But chaos is not evil. Chaos is potential. In the earliest cosmologies, the universe is not born from order, but from a sacred rupture, a cleaving of chaos into form. Tiamat is slain, and from her body the world is shaped. The dragon bleeds rivers, her ribs become mountains, her eyes, the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates. Creation is not neat. It is violent, sacred, and wild. To kill the serpent is to shape the world. But every act of creation leaves something behind, a residue, a scar. Leviathan is that scar. It is the echo of what was sacrificed to make the world safe. The memory of the ocean before it was charted, the god that refused to be tamed. And that memory lingers in waves, in dreams, in the back of every mind that has ever stared too long into the black water. The ancients knew this. That is why the image of the serpent reappears in every corner of the world, not always in the sea, but always beneath. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of the Aztecs. Vritra, the dragon slain by Indra in Vedic myth. Apophis, the chaos snake of Egyptian night. These are not copies. They are memories, fragmented, refracted, but never forgotten. A collective truth, spoken in different tongues. Each culture gives its Leviathan a different face, a different fate. Some are slain, some endure, some are venerated. But all of them point to the same mystery, the ocean of the unconscious and the being that swims in it. Not a creature, but a force, a presence, a threshold. And like all thresholds, Leviathan must be crossed, not with swords, but with surrender. To face it is to dissolve, to become water, to let go of what is solid and know the fluid. This is the terror and the gift. In the old myths, those who returned from such encounters were not the same. They walked differently, spoke differently. The salt clung to their skin. The rhythm of waves echoed in their speech. They had seen the deep, and the deep had seen them. There are whispers that Leviathan was once a god. Not a god of cruelty, but of transformation, the kind that arrives through fear, the kind that does not offer comfort, but truth. In the ritual texts of the ancient Near East, there are hymns not just of battle but of mourning, songs that suggest sorrow at the dragon's fall, as if something sacred was lost in the forging of order, as if the world, in slaying Leviathan, wounded itself. And perhaps that is the oldest lesson, that what we fear most may be the source of our power, that the monster we seek to destroy is the one thing that can wake us. But what if we never wanted to be woken? What if, somewhere deep within the cultural soul, there was a pact, unspoken, generational, to forget the sea and silence its gods? In the rise of civilization, water was tamed, bordered, drawn into canals. The ocean, once divine, became geography. Leviathan became metaphor. The serpent was no longer worshipped. It was buried. The burial was not accidental. It was a ritual, a deliberate act of spiritual repression. As empires rose, they demanded order. Kings declared themselves God-appointed, and gods could no longer be wild. The divine had to reflect the throne. Law replaced myth, morality replaced mystery. The serpent, that old anarchic symbol, had no place in a world of columns and codices, and yet it returned. Every era that tried to silence Leviathan ended up conjuring it anew. in literature, in fear, in revolt. In medieval Europe, sailors spoke of sea serpents stretching longer than ships, eyes like lanterns, teeth like harpoons. They were warned not to utter the beast's name, for it would rise to meet its caller. In the Renaissance, the Leviathan took a new form, the hidden engine of empire. The depths were mapped not to explore, but to conquer. Oceans became highways for colonization, and beneath their surface lurked not just monsters of myth, but the ghost of Leviathan itself, now haunting the very structures built to erase it. By the Enlightenment, Leviathan had been rationalized. It no longer lived in the sea, but in the systems of man, in the vast machine of the state, in institutions, in social contracts. Hobbes made it a body politic, stitched together from human limbs, governed by fear to preserve peace. But this was only another mask. The truth was darker, older. The Leviathan that terrified the ancients had never been a creature. It was a principle, a force that resists containment. It is the pull toward the deep, toward dissolution of ego, of empire, of identity. It is the chaos that reveals the lie of control. This is why it must be slain in every myth. Not because it is evil, but because it threatens the illusion of stability. And yet some myths hint at another possibility. In a fragment of the Book of Enoch, Leviathan is not a threat, but a mystery, a feminine presence dwelling in the sea, counterpart to Behemoth of the land. The two are not enemies, but balance, not apocalypse, but symmetry. And in this version, Leviathan is not killed. She waits in the deep undisturbed. This feminine aspect is crucial, because in most mythologies the ocean is gendered female, vast, fertile, unknowable. The serpent, coiled in her belly, becomes a womb symbol as much as a weapon, and to descend into her is not just to face danger, but to undergo rebirth. The hero who survives the sea does not simply win. He is remade. This is the inversion hiding in the heart of the myth. Leviathan is not a dragon to be slain, but a gate to be crossed. The violence of the tale is a veil. Beneath it lies transformation. A death, yes, but a necessary one. The old self must drown for the new one to breathe. Yet this idea threatens power. It threatens dogma. And so Leviathan is recast, not as threshold, but as enemy. Not as sacred, but as profane. This is how the myth was inverted. This is how truth was locked beneath the tide. And those who remembered it, mystics, dreamers, heretics, were taught to fear their visions. The image of Leviathan became forbidden, not by decree, but by silence. It was excised from liturgy, reduced to footnotes, buried beneath layers of allegory. Only fragments remained, glimmers in apocrypha, half-sentences in lost books, whispers behind holy fire, but the tide never forgets. In dreams and madness, Leviathan returned, not as a beast of bone and fang, but as a ripple in the psyche, a tremor at the edge of language, a hunger that no prayer could quiet. Those who encountered it often describe the sensation as drowning, not of water, but of self, the known world slipping away. This is the myth's cruel genius. It does not need belief to function. It needs only fear, because to face Leviathan is to face the part of ourselves that cannot be named, the oceanic void behind the mask of reason. It is not evil. It is not good. It simply is. And in a world obsessed with binary truths, such ambiguity is intolerable. That is why Leviathan must be rewritten every age, to keep it at bay, to name it just enough to disarm it, never enough to understand. Yet sometimes the veil slips. In the medieval Kabbalistic texts, Leviathan is given a new dimension. No longer merely a beast, it becomes a cosmic reality, the spiral energy of the world itself, circling beneath creation like a coiled root. It is not separate from God, but a reflection, a mirror of divine infinity, distorted through the prism of form. And here, in the darkest corners of mysticism, something shocking appears. Leviathan is joy, a joy so immense it cannot be touched, a joy reserved for the end of days, when all dualities collapse. The Zohar speaks of a great feast, not of flesh but of wisdom. Leviathan's body is knowledge, devoured not by mouths but by minds. This idea shatters the old dichotomy. The monster is no longer fearsome. It is beautiful, necessary, sacred, and the slaying of Leviathan is not a punishment, but an offering. This changes everything. What if the tale has always been misread? What if the slaying was never a conquest, but a sacrifice? A divine being offering itself so that the world might awaken? In this light, Leviathan becomes Christ-like, not in form, but in function. The archetype of the sacred death, the giver of knowledge through destruction. Not apocalypse, apotheosis. But this truth is buried deep, protected by metaphor. Because such an idea is dangerous. It empowers the seeker to question the story itself, to see in the serpent not evil, but divinity misunderstood, to look at the chaos within and find not shame but revelation. No empire can survive such thoughts. And so, again, Leviathan is cast down. Again, the story is scrubbed clean. Again, the sea is made dumb, its monsters fictional, its gods forgotten. But the waters still speak, in ritual, in trance. In those uncanny moments when the rational world flickers and something vast peers through. A dream of coils, a voice without language, a presence too immense to bear. Leviathan has no temple, but its altar is the threshold of change, and every soul at some point must kneel there, because the myth of Leviathan is not about a sea monster. It is about the moment when the self breaks open, when the carefully arranged architecture of identity buckles under the weight of the unknown. That moment, sacred and terrifying, has many names: crisis, revelation, madness, awakening. Leviathan is all of them. It is the moment you realize the map is not the territory. In ancient rites of passage, initiates were led into darkness, caves, labyrinths, oceans, to simulate death, not to end life, but to dissolve its boundaries. When they returned, they were not merely adults, they were remade. Their old names, identities, and fears had been swallowed by something older than language. That something was Leviathan, not as a beast, but as the shape of unknowing. The sacred void that precedes rebirth. The myth encoded this rite in symbol: a dragon, a descent, a slaying. But the meaning was always deeper. Leviathan is not killed to banish fear. It is killed because only by facing it do we remember what we are. This is why the monster's death is never permanent. Every time the old stories are retold, from the Babylonian Enuma Elish to the Psalms to apocalyptic Christian visions, Leviathan rises again. Different names, same shape, different weapons, same ritual. This is the myth's truth. The sea is not linear. It cycles. The serpent returns. The self too is a cycle, and at the heart of that cycle is transformation. Carl Jung once wrote that monsters are the guardians of treasure. He did not mean gold. He meant self-knowledge. The parts of ourselves we bury, the traumas, the shadows, the forbidden desires, are guarded by fearsome symbols. To reach them, one must first pass the beast. Leviathan is the guardian of the threshold, and the treasure it protects is not external. It is the inner ocean, the deep well of the unconscious, where our truest, most ancient self sleeps. The self unchained by culture, language, or fear. The self that remembers the gods of the sea because it once dreamed with them. This is why Leviathan terrifies theology. It suggests that the divine is not above but below, not in the sky but in the water, not in rules but in rupture. And so the myth becomes a battleground, not just of gods and serpents, but of worldviews. One that seeks to control through law and distance, another that invites collapse and union. Leviathan stands at the center of this tension, a symbol both feared and secretly desired. Because chaos is freedom, and freedom, ungoverned, is unbearable. So the serpent is bound, again and again, in chains of scripture, in nets of science, in cages of ridicule. But the water remembers, the body remembers. Every time a human soul reaches the edge of its known life, in grief, in illness, in revelation, Leviathan stirs. And what does it offer? Not comfort, not salvation, but truth. Raw, cold, indifferent. The truth that we are temporary, that the sea does not care for names, that what we call evil may simply be the parts of ourselves we have not yet dared to meet. In this way, Leviathan is a teacher, a terrifying, magnificent, necessary teacher. And if we are brave enough to meet its gaze, we may finally learn what waits beneath the tide. But learning is not the same as understanding, and understanding is not the same as accepting. What Leviathan offers is not a doctrine. It is an initiation, a plunge into formlessness, a baptism not of purity but of paradox. It does not ask for belief. It demands surrender. To accept Leviathan is to accept that not all truths are beautiful. Some truths are vast, cold, and without resolution. Some reside in silence, not speech, in dream, not doctrine. That is the realm of Leviathan, the truths that cannot be taught, only encountered. The truths that strip away the self. That stripping is violent. There is a reason ancient initiations simulated death. Leviathan does not kill the body, but it unravels the story the body tells. Your name, your roles, your ambitions. These are surface things, above the tide. But the serpent swims below, where nothing is fixed and every identity dissolves like salt. In modern times, we speak of ego death, of altered states, of the abyss within. Psychology tries to chart this terrain. Myth already has. Because Leviathan is not just a myth. It is a map, a symbol that points, again and again, to the terrifying freedom of the unknown self. A self not limited by narrative, but fluid, unformed, like water. This is why Leviathan is so often associated with the sea, not for its setting, but for its essence. The sea is not just a place. It is a principle, the principle of dissolution and rebirth. The tide does not destroy, it reshapes. To survive Leviathan is to emerge from the deep, not untouched, but reordered. But few make it through. In the stories, most are swallowed. Jonah in the whale, sailors lost to sea serpents, cities drowned by divine wrath. These are not punishments. They are metaphors for the failure to let go, to cling to the surface when the soul demands descent. Leviathan does not devour out of cruelty. It devours what refuses to transform. And still, we resist, because the surface is familiar. The surface has rules. Down below, there are no rules, only rhythm, instinct, mystery. It is no accident that Leviathan was turned into a monster in monotheistic texts. A god who rules alone cannot abide a sea with a will of its own. But the will of the sea was never destroyed. It was exiled. Leviathan became a shadow cast by suppressed truths, the truths of a world that is wild, feminine, cyclical. In dreams, It returns, in visions, in the moments when the soul aches and language fails. It arrives not with horns or flames, but with silence, with depth, with that sudden sinking sense that everything you are is about to dissolve. That is the invitation and the danger, because not everyone can survive that kind of dissolution. Some emerge transformed, others shatter. The journey is not safe, but myth never promised safety, only meaning, and meaning is never found in comfort. It is found in confrontation. In that moment when the monster you feared opens its mouth, and instead of teeth, you find your reflection. Because Leviathan was never the enemy. It was the mirror, distorted, yes, but honest. In its coils we see the shape of what we repress, our hunger, our rage, our longing to break free. The monster is not outside us. It is the part of us that dares to disobey the story. And stories, we must remember, are prisons as much as they are maps. Civilization is built on narratives, sacred, social, scientific. We are taught who we are, what is real, what is possible. But Leviathan waits beneath those truths, whispering of older ones. It asks, what if everything you know is only the surface? What if the sea has a memory deeper than scripture? What if the serpent you were told to fear was once a goddess? This is the fracture that splits the myth wide open. For in the earliest layers of the Leviathan story, before Babylon, before Canaan, before the scribes of Jerusalem, we find not a beast, but a being, a feminine force, bound not by cruelty, but by power. She was the sea in motion, the womb of chaos, not evil, but origin, and her name was not Leviathan. Her name was Tiamat. Long before the Hebrews, the Sumerians spoke of Tiamat as the mother of all, a dragon who birthed the cosmos and was slain by Marduk, the hero god. From her body, he crafted the heavens and earth. The world, quite literally, was made from her corpse. Creation through sacrifice. But the sacrifice was one-sided. Tiamat did not offer herself. She was killed, conquered, dismantled, and the myth of Leviathan was born from her bones. What had once been mother became monster. What had once been sacred became dangerous. Her name erased, her power renamed. Her divinity hidden in metaphor. This is the true inversion. Leviathan is not the chaos that threatens order. It is the order that remembers its origin in chaos. A remnant of the feminine divine, twisted into a threat to justify its erasure. The serpent was once the goddess. The beast was once the creator. But that truth was buried beneath empire, because empires cannot tolerate wildness. They cannot allow divinity to rise from the ocean, from the feminine, from the depths. So Leviathan had to be recast as male, as monstrous, as enemy of God. And thus the myth was inverted, sealed, and sanctified. But myths do not die. They transform. And through cracks in the canon, the old serpent breathes. In the quiet places, dreams, trances, forgotten scriptures, Tiamat stirs. Not as a threat, but as memory. The memory of a world where the divine had no throne, only tide, where wisdom was found not in conquest, but in surrender. And here the twist becomes clear. Leviathan is not the story we were told. It is the story beneath the story. The lost mother. The sacred wound. The god who was made into a monster, so the monster could be slain. And in slaying it, we inherited a world that forgot its source. But the ocean has not forgotten. The tide still carries her name, in rhythms older than speech. Even now, beneath the surface of modern myths and sanitized religions, her presence pulses, not as dogma, but as ache. The ache of something lost. The ache of the deep. The Leviathan, as we know it, is a grave marker for a forgotten goddess. And like all proper ghosts, she lingers where she was betrayed. She does not demand vengeance, she does not cry out, she waits, because her revenge is not destruction. It is remembrance. Every time the waves crash against the shore, something ancient speaks. A rhythm, a pulse. Not words, but a call. And those who hear it, truly hear it, are changed. They see the serpent not as a curse, but as a question. What else have we buried? This question, simple and immense, is Leviathan's real terror. It reveals that our world may be built on the bones of erased truths, that what we call order may be a shrine to conquest, that divinity might be wider, wilder than the gods we inherited. And this is not just metaphor, it is history. Across cultures, the rise of patriarchal theologies required the silencing of the feminine. Not only women, but symbols. The moon, the ocean, the serpent, the cyclical, the intuitive, all were cast into shadow. And Leviathan, once a queen of the waters, was made into a beast. But the bones of her temple remain. In every culture where a sea serpent myth survived, we find echoes of this older form, not monstrous, but majestic. In the Maori tradition, Tangaroa rules the sea, but the Taniwa, great aquatic beings, are not inherently evil. In Japanese lore, Ryujin is a dragon god of tides and transformation. In the Celtic world, the sea is a living being, to be honored, not conquered. All of these speak of the same undercurrent. The sea as sacred, not sinful. The serpent as guardian, not threat. But in the Western world, this truth was drowned. The Leviathan became a warning. Do not stray. Do not question. Do not enter the depths. Stay on the land, where things are named and neat, where gods are high and monsters are low. But those who have walked the shore at night, who have listened to the black waves sing, they know the lie. They feel the memory moving in the tide. And sometimes they dream of her, not as a horror, but as a mother, massive, terrible, kind. Her coils are not chains, but embraces. Her eyes do not burn, they reflect. She does not devour, she reveals. And in that moment, something inside begins to stir. Something older than doctrine. Something wordless. A recognition. Because the Leviathan is not something you defeat. It is something you remember. And in remembering, you change. You become sea-born again, no longer afraid of the dark, because the dark is home, no longer ashamed of the serpent, because the serpent is truth, no longer lost, because you were never separate from her to begin with. The monster was the mother, and she never stopped calling. But the world grew louder. Concrete drowned the coastlines. The stars were replaced by screens, the old chants were forgotten, replaced by creeds, codes, and contracts. Leviathan's voice, once thunder in the bones, became a faint echo beneath the surface of waking life. Only in dreams, in crisis, or in madness does she speak clearly, and when she does not bring answers. She brings undoing, because she is not the goddess of comfort. She is the goddess of dissolution. Her gift is the tide that pulls you from everything you thought was you, every label, every certainty, every belief. She does not teach by telling, she teaches by taking. This is why her myths are so often disguised as monsters, because to modern minds, loss of identity feels like death. But Leviathan's unmaking is not erasure. It is preparation. She is not here to punish. She is here to return us to something more ancient than selfhood, the sea mind, the dream mind, where we do not divide ourselves from the world, but flow within it. To be consumed by Leviathan is to become oceanic, And in that state, we remember a truth so simple it terrifies us. We are not separate, not from each other, not from nature, not from the divine. The serpent in the deep is not coming to devour us. She is coming to reunite us with what we lost, what we denied, what we buried. But that reunion feels like death to the ego. So we flee, we demonize, we name her chaos and call her evil. But chaos is not the opposite of order. It is the womb of it, and wombs are where all stories begin. This is the third truth of Leviathan, not myth, not monster, but memory. A memory too vast to be housed in words. A memory stored in tides, in dreams, in the curve of a spiral shell. A memory that returns not as history, but as intuition. Children hear her first. They speak of sea dragons and dream whales without fear. They know what adults forget, that not everything beautiful must be tame, that not everything sacred wears a crown, that sometimes the holiest things have scales. But as they grow, they are taught to forget, to fear the dark, to mistrust the deep, to cut the world in half, sacred and profane, male and female, order and chaos, and to fear the bridges between. Leviathan is that bridge. And bridges frighten those who only feel safe on one side. But the soul longs to cross, and so, quietly, it remembers. Through art, through longing, through that strange ache we feel when standing before the ocean, with no words. That is not fear. That is recognition. The old mother, waiting, not gone, not slain, just hidden, until we are ready to see her, not as threat, but as mirror, not as punishment, but as promise. A promise that the dark is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a truer one. Because in every myth worth remembering, the descent is not the end. It is the turning point, the moment when the hero realizes that what he feared was not death, but transformation. And what waited in the deep was never an enemy. It was his own becoming. This is the wisdom Leviathan carries in her coils. That darkness is not the absence of light, but the container of it. That the soul, like the sea, must ebb before it can rise, and that we are not meant to conquer the unknown, but to be changed by it. The old mystics knew this. In the writings of the Gnostics, we find echoes of Leviathan hidden under other names. Sophia fallen into the world, the divine feminine exiled and buried, yet still bearing the spark of salvation. In Kabbalah, the Shekinah weeps in exile, waiting for reunion. In Sufi poetry, the beloved lives behind the veil of fear. The serpent and the bride are not opposites. They are masks of the same force, the sacred longing for wholeness. But longing alone is not enough. There must be descent, a willingness to lose the map, to go beneath. This is the journey Leviathan demands, not a journey across the world, but into the self. And the deeper you go, the more you leave behind. Certainty, status, control. These are not tokens of spiritual wealth, they are armor. And Leviathan strips them from you one by one until all that remains is the part of you that can still feel awe, the part that can kneel before mystery without needing to master it. That is the soul's true shape, not a throne, a tide. And when we reach that place, when we finally let go of every false safety and float in the dark, something begins to shift. The fear does not vanish, but it changes. It softens. Because fear is only the mind's reaction to its own limits. When we stop resisting those limits, we begin to see beyond them. And what we see is not chaos. It is connection. The vast web of being. The breath behind the wave. The song in the silence. Leviathan is not the monster in that moment. She is the guide. The threshold guardian who shows us that the world is not broken. It is wider than we imagined, more ancient, more alive, and it includes us, not as rulers, not as sinners, but as kin, to the sea, to the serpent, to the shadow, to the light. This is not theology, it is memory. The memory of what we were before we were taught to fear the deep. The memory of the divine as wild, and the wild as divine. This is the revelation at the heart of Leviathan, and it does not roar. It whispers, like waves under the moon, not to terrify, but to remind, that you have heard this voice before, in the womb, in the wind, in the stillness between thoughts. It is not foreign, it is forgotten, and Leviathan is not here to break you. She is here to bring you back, back to the water, back to the beginning, back to the place where fear and wonder are the same breath. In the myths, Leviathan is always immense. That is no coincidence. She represents the truth too large for doctrine, too fluid for language. And when we approach her, truly approach, we do not find conquest or closure. We find awe. And awe, in its truest form, is not pleasant. It is unraveling. It humbles. It silences. It cracks open the part of the self that believed it was the center. Awe does not affirm identity. It dissolves it. And what takes its place is not emptiness, but presence. This is what Leviathan offers. Not a lesson, but a state. A way of being that is ancient, porous, and alive. A way of walking through the world as if everything breathes, because it does. In this vision, the ocean is not a resource, but a relative. The serpent is not a threat, but a teacher. The self is not a fortress, but a wave shaped and reshaped by currents older than culture. To enter this state, one must die, not the body, but the illusion. The illusion that we are alone, that we are separate, that we are superior. Leviathan exposes these lies not with argument, but with presence. Her sheer being undoes the story. She does not need to persuade. She only needs to be seen. And once seen, she cannot be forgotten. Even if you flee, her image remains. The curve of her spine in the bend of a river. The glint of her scales in a fish's shimmer. The weight of her silence in your dreams. She becomes a rhythm in your blood, a tide that never fully recedes. And slowly, you begin to change. Not through will, but through memory. The memory of being part of something vast. The memory of mystery. The memory of the sacred that does not shout, but breathes. And with this memory comes something even rarer. Reverence. Not the reverence of dogma, but of encounter. The kind that bows not to power, but to presence. To the wild holiness that lives beneath names. This is the soft power of Leviathan. Not dominion, but invitation. Not judgment, but reflection. Not fear, but depth. And in accepting her, we do not lose our humanity. We recover it. Because to be human is not to dominate nature. It is to dance with it. To remember we are made of salt and water, of storm and stillness. To remember that the divine was never only in the sky. It was also in the sea, and in the serpent, and in you. This is the final truth. Leviathan guards, the hardest to face, yet the most liberating. That the monster we feared, the goddess we lost, the ocean we tried to tame was never outside of us. It was our own reflection, vast and ancient, waiting to be remembered. Not a reflection in glass, a reflection in depth. Leviathan does not offer identity. She offers intimacy, with the wild, with the world, with the wounded parts of ourselves we banished in the name of control. In her presence, the sharp lines we draw between good and evil, sacred and profane, self and other, begin to blur. Because the sacred was never meant to be divided. It was meant to be encountered, and in that encounter, we are made whole. But wholeness does not come without pain. It is not a balm. It is a breaking of illusion, of hierarchy, of separation. To remember Leviathan is to let go of certainty, to become once more a creature of tide, of change, of mystery. That is the essence of the serpent. She coils not to constrict, but to contain, not to trap, but to hold. In her spiral, we see the shape of galaxies, of whirlpools, of time. She is not linear. She is not neat. She is not tame, and neither is the soul. The soul spirals, not toward progress, but toward depth. Each cycle brings us closer, not to answers, but to truth. And truth, in the language of Leviathan, is not something spoken. It is something felt, like the pull of the moon on blood, like the hush that falls when the sea goes still. This is why Leviathan never truly vanishes. She returns in every age, under different names and different myths, because she is not a character. She is a force, an archetype, a remembering. And when the world forgets how to listen, she stirs, in floods, in dreams, in the ache behind your ribs when you stare too long at the horizon. She is not coming to punish, she is coming to invite. To kneel before her is not submission, it is reunion. The reunion of the human with the more than human, of intellect with instinct, of self with shadow. And the cost is everything you thought you were, but what you become is more, not more powerful, more real, more fluid, more alive. Because the serpent does not crown kings, she awakens pilgrims, those willing to walk the spiral, to dive, to be remade by mystery. And that path is not walked in temples or texts. It is walked in silence, in surrender, in the space between breaths, where she waits, not as a threat, as a mother. Her voice is not a roar, it is a call, and some part of you has already heard it. Some part of you is already answering, and that part has no name. It does not speak in words or creeds. It speaks in dreams, in tears, in the strange gravity that draws you to stories of monsters and oceans. You do not know why they haunt you, only that they do. And in that haunting, there is something sacred. Because the haunting is a memory, not of something past, but something buried. The paradox is this: Leviathan was never meant to be slain. She was meant to be understood. But in trying to kill her, in demonizing the serpent, exiling the feminine, fearing the deep, humanity severed something essential. We did not defeat the monster. We mutilated the mirror. And without that mirror, we forgot who we were. Civilization taught us to see Leviathan as the enemy of light. But the final twist is this: she is not the shadow cast by light. She is the light hidden within shadow. The hidden flame. The black sun. The mystery that refuses to be explained because it was never meant to be. It was meant to be experienced. The ancients understood this, not in theory, but in ritual. They entered caves, temples, visions. They danced with the serpent. They drank the sea. They let go of form to find meaning. But in the age of conquest, that wisdom was broken. Leviathan was chained. Tiamat was butchered. The serpent was nailed to the ground. And we crowned ourselves the masters of a world we no longer understood. But Leviathan cannot be killed. She only sleeps. And her sleep is never silent. It thrums beneath the cities, the scriptures, the silences. It lives in the tremble before a storm, in the pull of grief that has no object, in the hunger for something wild, something whole, something true. That hunger is not weakness. It is a compass, and it points not upward, but inward, to the abyss we were taught to fear, the place of unmaking, the void. But in truth, the void is not empty. It is full, teeming, alive. It is the womb of the world, and Leviathan is its voice. She speaks not to frighten, but to awaken, not to destroy belief, but to reveal the ocean it floats upon, not to end the story, but to return us to its beginning. This is the great reversal, that the enemy we feared is the mother we forgot, that the terror was tenderness in disguise, that the serpent we fled is the soul we seek. And now, as her myth returns, not through dogma, but through dream, we face the same choice our ancestors did: to resist and fall into ruin, or to descend and rise changed. The old gods never truly die. They wait, in symbols, in cycles, in us. And Leviathan, ancient, exiled, eternal, waits most of all for us to stop fearing the sea and start remembering we are made of it. Because what we call the sea is not just water. It is memory, motion, mother, and Leviathan is not just myth. She is the part of us that remembers before remembering. The pulse beneath language. The tide that carries not just stories, but souls. In every myth that survives, there is a truth that refuses to die. Not a factual truth, a deeper one. That what we fear most may be the very thing that can save us. Leviathan, in the end, was never a monster. She was a message, sent across millennia in the shape of a serpent, cloaked in terror, so that only those ready to see would truly see. She hides because she must. Truth is not safe in plain sight. It needs mystery to stay alive. And so we descend, through darkness, through dreams, through the layers of forgetting. And there, in the deepest chamber, we find not a beast, but a mirror that reflects us, not as we pretend to be, but as we are. Wild, wounded, holy, a creature of salt and storm, a being born not to rule the world, but to feel it, to be in it, of it, with it. This is what Leviathan teaches. Not fear, not power, but presence. A return to the ancient intimacy between body and earth, mind and moon, myth and marrow. She is not asking for worship. She is offering reunion. The serpent coils not to constrict, but to embrace. To remind us that the path to the divine is not above us, but within. The ocean, after all, does not ask to be believed. It asks to be entered. And when we step into that tide, not just literally, but symbolically, we step into the vastness that shaped us, the chaos that birthed cosmos, the mother who was misnamed, the myth who was misunderstood, and we begin to walk differently, not with certainty, but with wonder, not with conquest, but with care, not to master the world, but to belong to it again. This is the final gift of Leviathan. A truth so old it feels new, a story so strange it feels familiar, a monster so feared it was hiding a mother's face. And if we listen, truly listen, we might hear her even now, in the hush before thunder, in the rhythm of waves, in the silence between heartbeats. She is not gone, she is rising, from the depths we denied, from the myths we forgot, from the parts of ourselves we were taught to silence. And with her return, the story begins again. Not the old story, a truer one. And maybe this time, we won't be afraid. Thank you for journeying into the abyss with me, through the coils of Leviathan and into the forgotten memory of the oceanic divine. These stories, strange, ancient, and echoing with mystery, are not just legends. They are mirrors, and they are maps. If this tale moved something in you, stirred an old knowing, or opened a new question, I invite you to stay close. There are more stories waiting in the deep, more truths disguised as monsters, more myths to be unmasked. Until then, may you walk gently beside the sea and remember what you're made of.